We are in Wągrowiec. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome in the company of the President of the Republic of Poland, Andrzej Duda. Good evening, Mr. President.
Dobry wieczór, panie prezydencie.
Dobry wieczór, panie redaktorze.
Good evening, and hello to our
Panie
viewers.
prezydencie, jesteśmy tu po spotkaniu, po pańskim spotkaniu z Polakami. Trwa kampania.
Mr. President, we are here after your meeting with the Poles. The election campaign is going on, but at the same time, today is a significant date in the latest history of Poland. On one hand, June 4th, 1989, was a day of hope for millions of Poles and a date associated with the June elections. On the other hand, a date associated with what happened 3 years later, something that millions of Poles consider a betrayal, a break in hope for a new Poland. A date associated with an attempt to build secret agreements with Russia and to hide the truth about secret agents. Mr. President, how do you look at this date in our history, this day?
Patrzę na te daty jako na naszą historię i powiem tak, one obie są bardzo ważne.
I look at these dates as our history, and I will say this, both of them are very important. If we look at the whole historical cycle of the last 35 years, because that's how you have to count it, indeed, the great events of 1989, I must say that I do not agree with all those who say that the Round Table itself was a betrayal, that these elections in June 1989 were unnecessary, that they were betrayed, that they carried out poorly. I believe what was possible was done at that time, for us to have a bloodless revolution. It was a very important moment because it later became an example for a huge part of Europe. Of course, it was not possible to end communism everywhere, let alone Romania. By the way, very specific, as we already know from the history of what happened there. However, looking here at our Polish affairs, these elections, not fully free, under communist domination, but which turned out to be a plebiscite. Are you for Polish communism? Are you for the power dictated from Moscow and accepting instructions from Moscow? Are you for being in the Soviet zone of influence? Poles said no. For example, because back then the famous national list did not pass at all. People rejected the national list then. It was a great protest that should have been used then. That was the time to say stop. People spoke clearly. And the change that Prime Minister Jan Olszewski's government carried 3 years later, it should have been continued, because then, perhaps, all these changes that we were going through all these years would be calmer. Maybe fewer people would suffer. Maybe Poland would become a wealthy country sooner. Maybe it would become a truly honest and well-governed country sooner, where the informers are called informers. I am thinking about those who cooperated with the Communist Security Service, and they should have been eliminated from public life. It is not about being eliminated from life in all. They can run businesses, there are many possibilities for development, but eliminated from deciding about great public money, eliminated from the world of great politics, eliminated from representing Poland in various areas.
I wyeliminowani z życia publicznego. Nie chodzi o to, że wyeliminowani w ogóle z życia. Proszę bardzo, biznes można prowadzić, jest mnóstwo możliwości rozwoju, ale wyeliminowani z decydowania o wielkich publicznych pieniądzach, wyeliminowani ze świata wielkiej polityki, wyeliminowani z reprezentowania Polski w różnych obszarach.
No ale w gruncie rzeczy właśnie to stało się podstawą do tego, co wydarzyło się, no właśnie 4 czerwca 1992 roku.
But in fact, this was the basis for what happened on June 4th, 1992. Not only the issue of security informers in public institutions, but also earlier attempts to create a formal agreement on the legacy of the Soviets in the former Soviet bases in Poland. They were the subject of a dispute between the elected fully free democratic government and the majority. When we look at it today, we often see the same faces of politicians who also rule a certain great coalition. It is difficult not to remember those informers on June 4th, especially since they are often the same faces, the same people.
Nie wracać pamięcią do tych odwołań, zwłaszcza, że często są to te same twarze.
No oczywiście mamy dzisiaj polityków, którzy zajmują bardzo ważne miejsca na scenie politycznej, a kilkakrotnie się przemalowywali w tym okresie.
Of course, we have politicians today who have very important roles on the political scene and have painted themselves several times during this period. One time they were great believers, then they fought with the Catholic Church. Once they were liberals, then they were post-communists, because in many cases they are. Some of them even joined the Samoobrona political party, I remind you, in the electoral sense. So it was a colorful 35 years. But this is what I emphasize today, also on the square here in Wągrowiec. Very clearly, after all, if we compare ourselves to other countries in Central Europe, those that all came out of the Iron Curtain in these 2 or 3 years after 1989, then we are in a very good development situation today, and a very good economic situation, taking into account our size in the geographical sense, 322,000 square meters, the largest country in Central Europe, and the population of 38 million. It is not easy to carry out large reforms in such a country. They are very difficult, much more expensive most often than in a small country. The more difficult, the longer lasting ones run with greater powerlessness. So if you make a mistake, it is difficult to stop it. And what is important, really a lot of good has happened for the Poles in the last 9 years.
Co jest ważne, naprawdę bardzo wiele dobrego dla Polaków stało się w ciągu ostatnich 9 lat.
Panie prezydencie, jeszcze
Mr. President, for a moment I would like to stay with the historical issues simply. Today we are talking about the history of the Third Polish Republic, the history of the fall of communism. When we look at our part of the world, most of it is actually the only country in this part of Europe that came out of the fall of communism, also strengthened territorially. Yugoslavia fell apart, Czechoslovakia fell apart as a country, and the Germans united. I am asking about this in the context of today's historical debates. We were with Telewizja Republika in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Federal Republic of Germany a few days ago, and what we saw was an incredible graphic located in the entrance to this institution, which shows the history of the 20th century of Germany without the date of September 1st, 1939, without the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, where World War II was carried out only until 1942. How do you look at this? Because these are matters that are of great importance today, also in the current geopolitical competition in the world. We are also partners with the German state, and we demand, at least officially, reparations for World War II. And according to the opinion of the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it clearly did not occur.
jej nie było.
Myślę, że to jest tak, że Niemcy od dziesięcioleci prowadzą bardzo spokojną i konsekwentną politykę historyczną.
I think it is so that the Germans have been conducting a very calm and consistent historical policy for decades, investing very large financial funds in it. They are conducting a historical policy. They are also conducting a policy of education of other nations in general. And in the space of these 35 years, it can be shown in a very plastic way in our part of Europe, where from the very beginning, the Germans enter such countries as Poland. After structural changes, they introduced the Goethe Institute here. They introduce other institutions which convey the German point of view in a very thoughtful, very often subtle way. Mr. Editor, we have been laughing and asking for a long time, who are the Nazis?
Dzisiaj mówimy, a kto to są naziści?
Those who enslaved the Germans, according to this official version. Please note that today, in the speeches of most Western politicians, when it comes to World War II, there is still talk of Nazis, 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 and the word Germans does not appear. Who were they, the Nazis? Aliens?
Panie prezydencie, był pan na Monte Cassino, nie było tam żadnego przedstawiciela rządu.
Mr. President, you were at Monte Cassino. There was no representative of the government there. There were representatives of the parliament. There was no minister of defense. There was no minister of foreign affairs. The head of the Office of Combatant Affairs gave a speech there. And in the official text of the speech, in the booklet that was handed out to the participants, in the official program, was his speech with the phrase about 90,000 of our grandfathers from Wehrmacht. In this place, in this context, at the moment when we all celebrated the greatest victory of Poland in World War II, the victorious battle with the Germans, how do you see this way of presenting history in this place at this time?
Prezentowania historii w tym miejscu, w tym czasie.
No, wie pan, no, patrzę na to z ubolewaniem.
I look at it with grief, but on the other hand, I am aware of who I am dealing with. I am aware of people who say, because it is this group, the same political environment, who say, why do we need a great airport? There is a great airport in Berlin. People who today, let's see, because I will be very curious to see what will happen in the airports in Gdańsk, in Świnoujście, in Szczecin, in Gdynia, where there were very advanced expansion plans, practically already starting. The deepening in Gdynia has been going on for the last few years. Will these investments continue? Will these ports, which have a chance to continually grow and therefore be an increasing more and more oppressive competition for German ports, for example in Hamburg or in Rostock, will they still be expanded? Or will all these big investments be stopped here because we have become too competitive? Because we are making too big of a problem? Because the economy in the neighboring country has slowed down and our economy has not slowed down? And we are developing too fast? We are becoming too serious a competitive market and at the same time too big? Because there are 38 million of us and we have 322,000 square kilometers and we already have highways from the north to the south. Why do you need highways throughout the country? Why do you need the roads from your airports to the south of Europe? After all, you can take a ship to Hamburg, to Rostock, you can unpack your goods there, you can carry them by highways in another country, you can stop at gas stations on these other highways, refuel there, pay taxes there, do all your business there, take advantage of the hotels there, of the tourist and gastronomic services there, leave money there. Meanwhile, we are becoming a more and more dynamic competition. And that is why today, among other things, there's a hard discussion about the fact that we need a central communication port. Yes, because it will be a realistic competition for other communication ports in Europe. Because it will strengthen the development of our infrastructure, because it will increase the attractiveness of Poland as a place to run a business, as a cargo hub, as a transport hub, everything that is key in the development of a modern state.
Panie prezydencie, dziś
Mr. President, I will also ask about this. At the moment, literally a few days ago, this weekend, Süddeutsche Zeitung published information about the fact that German journalists came into possession of several thousand documents of the German Ministry of Economy, as well as the Chancellor's office, and quoted some of these documents. A large part of them talk about Poland. It turns out that, according to what the officials of the German government themselves wrote, Polish resistance during the ruling of the Law and Justice Party in Poland, during the time when Beata Szydło was prime minister and you were president, she was a great obstacle for the implementation of Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. And the presidency of Donald Trump was perceived by the highest German officials as an obstacle to the implementation of this project. At the same time, in these documents, it is written in black and white that the officials considered this project to be geopolitical, despite the fact that Angela Merkel, but also politicians in Poland, said that this economic project has nothing to do with politics. How do you look at it today, black and white, on German documents?
No bo w gruncie rzeczy Niemcy są mocarstwem europejskim.
Well, because in fact, the Germans are the European power when it comes to the economy, and the Germans simply wanted to conduct an imperial economic policy in Europe. Economic policy, I emphasize, when it comes to energy supply, gas. They wanted the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline to bypass Central Europe in an agreement with the Russians to come straight to them, so that it would go through Germany, so that they would be the gas hub, so that they would also have control over these pipes, and so that, in fact, they could decide together who and what gas supplies would be received in Europe, and so that they would earn from each gas transfer to individual European countries to which this gas would be transported. After all, it was a very simple idea that was implemented in a tough and brutal way, apart from what we already know and what we see. The German industry was to rely on this cheap Russian gas to a great extent, and its competitiveness, among other things, was to result from the possibility of obtaining cheap energy resources. All this with the Russian aggression against Ukraine, blocking the Nord Streams, well, it broke down very much.
Blokowania Nord Streamów, bardzo mocno się
ale w
przełamało.
tych dokumentach jest
But in these documents, it is written that even after the attack of Russia on Ukraine in 2014, in the internal analysis, the authors say that there is no possibility in the coming decades for Germany to become independent of Russian gas. And this machine was working. The Russians attacked Ukraine. They claimed that it was not them, that it was the green people, but everyone knew everything. The Germans knew what was going on, why it was going on, but they still continued to invest in it. Does this mean, having this knowledge in the light of these documents, that the Germans risked the security of Central Europe for their own interests?
państw Europy Środkowej dla własnych interesów?
Panie redaktorze, Niemcy realizowali...
Mr. Editor, the Germans pursued their own interests simply, without looking at anyone. I said it here today on the square in Wągrowiec. Great European countries pursue their own interests without looking at anyone. Anyone who thinks that the great European countries will pursue Polish interests is naive. They will not. They will pursue Polish interests only when it is a side effect of their own main interests. What about Poland, which should pursue its own interests? And we have seen in recent months that several key investments have been stopped. Today, the Law and Justice Party published a report on this topic.
do wyborców w całej Polsce. Proszę głosować.
This is why I appeal to voters all over Poland. Please vote for such representatives to the European Parliament, and in less than a year, please vote for such people in the presidential elections, women, men, I don't know who the candidates will be, that are really dedicated to representing Polish interests. Because Polish interests are our interests. Polish interest is the individual interest of each of you.
Każdego z państwa.
Dzisiaj w Brukseli manifestacja rolników, kolejna
Today, in Brussels, another manifestation of farmers from several European countries, a very large representation of Poles in Brussels, and a demand for the liquidation and withdrawal from the Green Order, from this concept of economic policy, energy policy, or climate policy. In your opinion, based on your knowledge, is it possible at all for Europe to withdraw?
możliwe jest w tej chwili wycofanie się Europy z tej...
Hello, panie
Hello,
redaktorze.
Mr. Editor. Either there is a democracy or there is not. Either what European politicians in Europe, light and democratic, says about democracy is true or it is not. If there is democracy, then everything can be changed. Every plan can be changed. Every date set, especially in the perspective of many decades, can be changed. If we agree that something will be until 2050, then we can make a decision in 2 years that it will not be until 2050, but until 2060. And if it is not possible, it means that there is no democracy. It means that someone is holding their hand on it and blocking it. But what if in Europe, in the European Parliament, to which the members of the Parliament are elected in 27 countries, the majority will be different from ours? The majority in Poland, 90% of Poles, almost 90%, the weekly newspaper Solidarność published such a study, is against the implementation of this policy. The International Monetary Fund has just published data that shows that this energy transformation for Poland and Central Europe will cause an economic reduction of energy independence, not an increase. What then, when we want something different from the rest of Europe?
Chcieli w Parlamencie
It
Europejskim.
is the duty of our representatives in the European Parliament and all our politicians and influential people to lobby wherever possible and influence these decisions to be changed. And when it comes to voting, and the majority of deputies to the European Parliament vote differently than Poles want, if the majority of countries in Europe will vote differently than Poles want, what then? I'm asking this especially in regards to the new term of office of the European Parliament. Mr. Editor, first of all, we should do our own thing. As I said at the beginning of this topic, we should pursue our own interests. Once again, Polish, that is, our own interests. That is, to implement modern technology in Poland today. I am thinking here about nuclear energy. This is the duty of the Polish authorities today. Those who will not do it are essentially betraying the state. This is my inner belief. If these politicians realize what our European obligations are, then in any case, delaying these investments with premeditation means betraying the state. Does this betrayal of the state mean that they want to lead us to the point that we will not have energy and that they will put Poles against a potential blackout? Does this change lead to us not being energetically sovereign because we will have to take this energy from other countries because we will not have our own resources of energy? In any case, it is a blatant betrayal of Polish interests. That is, in essence, it is a betrayal of the state.
Zdrada polskich interesów, czyli w istocie jest to zdrada stanu.
A widzi pan w
And
tej
do you see at the moment things that indicate that the work on nuclear energy is being delayed?
nad energetyką nuklearną w Polsce?
Widzę pierwsze niepokojące sygnały.
I see the first disturbing signs. I cannot yet say that I see some definite delay, which would cause deadlines not to be met. But I see disturbing signs, and these discussions, which of course also last, and this constant dragging from week to week, from month to month, is disturbing to me. That is why I talk about it every time, because in essence, the role of the president here is unfortunately small. This is just a reminder and being vocal about these matters. That is why I talk about it everywhere I am.
Mówienie głośno o tych sprawach, dlatego wszędzie, gdzie jestem, o tym mówię.
Panie prezydencie, czy
Mr. President, is the Green Order, from the perspective of Poland, from the perspective of yourself, the head of the state, a solution to be thrown out?
Panie redaktorze, ja powiem tak, to nie jest taka prosta sprawa.
Mr. Editor, I will say this. It is not such a simple matter. There are some aspects. In general, in the entire policy of climate protection, the so-called green economy, there are aspects that are undoubtedly positive aspects, because it is also a huge development opportunity. This means that there will be a spark for scientific research, that we will be creating new technologies, that maybe it will turn out that hydrogen drives will be refined, hydrogen as a fuel of the future. And it may turn out that the world of motorization will completely change. This is all a matter of the future, and it is always related to whether the appropriate money will be invested in scientific research, in the development of these modern technologies. I believe that this is the direction to go. And from this point of view, this policy, which some call a killer, undoubtedly has its additional aspects, that it somehow forces this pro-development trend, so that we do not stay in the polluting diesels forever, but that we go into what is more climatic, what will indeed save the natural environment for future generations, what will lead to the fact that we will also live in an increasingly better atmosphere and increasingly better conditions.
Dla przyszłych pokoleń, co będzie prowadziło do tego, że my również będziemy żyli w coraz lepszej atmosferze i coraz lepszych warunkach.
But you are convinced that the way to do this is...
Nie neguję, bo to jest kwestia
I
odpowiedzialności.
absolutely do not deny this, because it is also a matter of responsibility for the fate of future generations. And I pay attention to this, but it has to be done on the basis of what we worked on and implemented in Katowice during COP24, just transition, fair transformation. That is, one that leaves no one behind, an inclusive transformation, not one that excludes, one that embraces everyone, one where everyone is a participant in the most positive sense of the word, where people have the opportunity to find a new job, to get new qualifications, to enter these modern forms of industry and become a part of this modern economy.
Stania się częścią tej nowoczesnej gospodarki.
Panie prezydencie,
Mr. President, at the same time, at the moment, the European Union is introducing a new policy. It has adopted the Migration Pact. The Migration Pact, which could not be introduced for many years. And at the same time, at the moment, we hear more information about wounded Polish soldiers, about Polish service officials who defend our borders, who are fighting for their lives at the moment. And at the same time, we see politicians who, 2 years ago, offended these same officials. Their media environment offended them. Our journalist, Michał asked Marshal Hołownia 2 days ago if representatives of the coalition will apologize to Polish service officials. Marshal Hołownia said that there is no need to apologize. Do you agree with that?
Zwracam uwagę, że Donald Tusk i jego ludzie prowadzą absolutnie bałamutną politykę.
First of all, I would like to point out that Donald Tusk and his people are carrying out a completely ridiculous policy. It is a completely ridiculous policy, a policy of lies, straight to our faces. I hope the Poles see it. I hope so because people in Poland are intelligent. I believe that they observe and draw conclusions from it. A few months ago, border guards were spit on. Polish uniforms were offended. Everyone who attacked Polish services and our functionaries protecting the border was praised. Today, when the gentleman took over responsibility, the people said, please take the responsibility and lead. That was the verdict of the Polish voters. Today, suddenly, a 180-degree turn, supposedly, when it comes to the border, although I will only ask one question. How did it happen that the border guard was wounded with a knife? Where was his bulletproof vest? He should have a bulletproof vest that protects him. I don't have any explanation at the moment where his bulletproof vest was to protect him from the stabbing with a knife that occurred. But this is a completely different matter, because it is a matter of equipment of our soldiers, as well as taking care of the fact that if this personal equipment is available, they should use it. However, I want to pay attention to something else. This nonsense is based on the fact that on one hand, they are fully aware of how big the threat on the border is, and that these migrants are simply used for the hybrid war against Poland.
Na granicy i że w istocie ci migranci są po prostu wykorzystywani do wojny hybrydowej przeciwko Polsce.
But this is the same hybrid war that took place in 1921. Today they are on the border, and today it is their problem. Therefore, today they are fully aware and they have dramatically changed their position. This is what lies and hypocrisy on their part is all about. Maybe they should apologize to the same people who today, perhaps... Have you ever heard them apologize? I think we should demand it. These are things that were absolutely incredible, even at the time when they were said. When Władysław Frasyniuk on TVN was calling Polish officials dogs, I have the impression that someone should react and say, stop. What is happening? And today, the political backing that Władysław Frasyniuk gave is on the other side, and it seems that nothing is happening, and Marshal Hołownia says we don't know what's going on. In 2011, during his campaign, Donald Tusk promised, directly looking into the camera, that the retirement age will not be increased, after which a few months later, after winning elections as Prime Minister, was sitting on the parliamentary stand when the retirement age was increased, and he looked in the eyes of all Poles, and I never heard him apologize. Neither him nor Bronisław Komorowski, who signed this law. Today, also from the politicians ruling Poland, we hear that they are defending Europe against Russian aggression. You spent many years, 2 almost full terms at the moment, watching out for the Russian threat, and for many years no one wanted to listen. How do you look at today's words, today's nominations, for example, or attempts to nominate, also created by this government in foreign policy, people who created the reset policy in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in many other places, today, with the exception of your prerogatives, such decisions are being made?
No, z ominięciem pańskich prerogatyw tego rodzaju decyzje są
W bardzo
wymuszane.
prosty sposób. Wtedy, kiedy wielcy
In a
Europejscy...
very simple way. Back then, when the great Europeans, for example, the Germans and others, said that you had to make friends with Russia, Mr. Donald Tusk and his people made friends with Russia, hugged Vladimir Putin, walked with him on the pier, then he was a warmly welcomed guest here. And when he attacked Ukraine and it turned out that unfortunately you cannot be friends with Vladimir Putin, even if you wanted to, you cannot make great gas interests with him, because everyone sees what happened and everyone sees what this terrible Russia did. How can you destroy interests like that? Now there is a permission to be against Vladimir Putin, to be against Russia, to say that Russia is running an imperial policy. So that's what they say.
Odwoływani
Bo
dziś
teraz
są
wolno.
do kraju ludzie,
Mr. President, people who carried out a policy of resistance against the Russian Federation in very difficult times have been recalled to the country. Tomasz Szatkowski carried out such a policy as an ambassador to NATO, and today we hear that the government wants to nominate people who led the reset policy from the position of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I will tell you something even better, Mr. Editor. Minister Radosław Sikorski wants to recall Mrs. Ambassador Pilecka from the embassy in Portugal, in Lisbon, who is the younger relative of Captain Pilecki. And he really wants to send Mr. Schnepf as the Polish ambassador, whose father, together with the Soviets, participated in the Augustów Roundup against the Poles.
Razem z Sowietami uczestniczył czynnie w obławie augustowskiej przeciwko Polakom. To jest właśnie
How should we understand this? This is the decommunization of Mr. Sikorski.
strefa dekomunizacji pana Sikorskiego.
We also hear that Washington, it should rather be called the recommunization zone. The recommunization of the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs is currently taking place. The recommunization of Polish diplomacy? Yes, exactly. Just a moment before the NATO summit, which is to take place in Washington, people are coming back, and today the important positions in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are again taken by people who graduated from Moscow University, the so-called MGIMO, and there they were taught how to deal with foreign services.
Panie prezydencie, do Waszyngtonu ma
Mr. President, Bogdan Klich, the Minister of Defense, is to be sent to Washington in times of, well, shameful times for Polish foreign policy, for Polish diplomacy. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs archives, I suppose, are still full of documents signed by Bogdan Klich, his reports, his letters talking about direct meetings with representatives of Vladimir Putin regime. And he is, at least, as it turns out from the semi-official information that reaches us, to replace the Polish ambassador in Washington, Marek Magierowski. Mr. Editor, whichever way you look at this, whether we blame or we don't blame, whether we hold someone responsible or not, sending to the United States, to the largest military power in the world, where the safety and health of the President of the United States is moved to an unimaginable category for Poles, because the streets of New York are completely shut down for an hour when the President of the United States is driving during the UN General Assembly. There are huge trucks with concrete responsible for blocking the most important arteries in New York. The city is paralyzed because the President of the United States is driving, and the roads are completely empty. Thousands of FBI agents, secret services, all services are watching him. And now Mr. Radosław Sikorski with Mr. Donald Tusk want to appoint as the Polish ambassador to the United States a man who was the Minister of National Defense when in a Polish government plane, actually a military plane, because I remind you that it was piloted by military pilots, it belonged to the Ministry of National Defense, the President of the Republic of Poland died in a plane crash, alongside the most important people in the country, the Polish elite. The guy who was then the Minister of National Defense, meaning he was responsible for the Polish army, they want to send him to the United States. This is going to be one big laugh.
Wtedy był ministrem obrony narodowej, czyli odpowiadał za polskie wojsko. Oni chcą wysłać do Stanów Zjednoczonych. Przecież to będzie jeden wielki rechot.
Panie prezydencie,
Mr. President, before us, before the whole world,
przed
Ja
całym
nigdy
światem,
się
I will never agree to it. As long as I am the president, I will never sign this ambassador nomination. Maybe when the next president comes, I don't know what he will do. I will not sign it because I will not compromise Poland.
Polski.
czy dotyczy to również
Does this also apply to other people who the government want to send to places where others have been recalled or called back to the country?
czy wezwani do kraju zostali...
No, to są inne sprawy.
These are different matters, and you have to look at each one separately. But I say, first of all, let's take a certain logical order to fill diplomatic positions, because today it is really led by methods from the worst imaginable services. What is being done today against many Polish diplomats, and for a long time now, actually since Mr. Sikorski is a minister, and since these people came along with him, information that they will soon have to return to the country were sent out on Good Friday. People have children, these children go to school, families panic. These are really UBEC methods of intimidation of people, forcing people to obey, and so on and so on. And I say, please keep calm. We have almost 30 unoccupied Polish embassies in the world, embassies where there is no ambassador simply because, unfortunately, he was not sent there thus far. We were represented there by the so-called char d'affaires. Please, in first order, staff these embassies. This is really a lot of work for the Foreign Affairs Committee in the same. I am very happy to start a quick process of approving candidates for ambassadors to these embassies.
Chętnie przystąpię do szybkiego procesu zatwierdzania kandydatów na ambasadorów do tych
Czy to
ambasad.
jest pewna propozycja?
Is this a type of proposal for the government? But I put this political proposal for the government to Mr. Sikorski a few months ago, but he pretends in the media that he doesn't hear it, that he doesn't know about it. This is one big wave of lies, what we hear from them.
To, co słyszymy z ich ust i z emerytów.
Mr. President, does this mean that, for example, we will not see your signature under the nomination for Richard Schnepf?
Nie, nie zobaczymy.
No, we will not. Mr. President, and we will not see my signature under anyone who belonged to the so-called ambassador conference. Because for me, these people have repeatedly compromised Poland and are unworthy of ambassador titles. They are unworthy of representing Poland. Richard Schnepf has written many times, he has published many texts that, let's say, thoroughly reviewed Polish politics when he was looking at it from a critical point of view, during the rule of the Law and Justice Party. Presidential elections are ahead of us in the United States. Polish votes in the United States have proven to be important many times before and will also be important in these elections. Does Mr. President intend to be in the United States, in those states where there's a lot of Polish diaspora, in Wisconsin, in a few other states that may have a key meaning to the presidential elections? And how do you expect that Poles will vote in presidential elections in the US?
W wyborach prezydenckich w USA głosować?
Nie mamy jeszcze sprecyzowanych planów dokładnie, jeżeli chodzi o to, co będzie się działo w
We do
drugiej
not have
połowie
precise plans yet when it comes to what will happen in the second half of the year when it comes to visits to the United States. For sure, we are approaching the NATO summit, but this is Washington and a strictly defined task that is to be done, namely the representation of Poland at the NATO summit, now in the first half of July. So this is definitely a visit to the United States, which is just ahead of us. And there will probably be a visit to New York, to the General Assembly of the United Nations, because I am there every year and I also represent Poland there. However, will there be any other destinations in the United States in connection with these visits, mainly with the second one in September? We will see after the talks with our citizens, because it is largely based on this. I would like to remind you that not so long ago we had an additional visit next to New York because we were in Savannah to visit the latest American nuclear power plant built in Westinghouse technology, which is also to be built in Poland for Polish needs. It is really impressive, a beautiful, safe investment. I can also say that it is very aesthetic. I can say this because I saw it with my own eyes, and this is really world class. I am happy about it, and I hope that we will soon have such a power plant and electricity coming from it. However, will there be such additional visits this fall, which will be dedicated strictly for meetings with Poles in various states in America? It is difficult for me to say.
Będą wizytami sensu stricto na spotkania z Polakami w różnych stanach w Ameryce. Trudno jest mi w tej
Czy
chwili
rozmawiał pan
Did you talk to the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, about Poles voting in the United
w
States?
Stanach Zjednoczonych?
Tak, oczywiście, ale to rozmawialiśmy raczej z tego punktu widzenia, że...
Yes, of course, but we talked rather from the point of view of President Donald Trump already having met with Poles, and he mentions these meetings with Poles with great gratitude and such empathy because, among others, he had such a meeting before the previous presidential elections, which he won, and with result of which he became the President of the United States. One of the large meetings was a meeting with Poles. As I always emphasize, he really knows Polish affairs, matters of our part of Europe. It does not surprise me because for many years he was the husband of a Czech citizen of the Czech Republic, former Czechoslovakia, because she left Czechoslovakia. Ivana Trump left Czechoslovakia, so he definitely talked a lot with his wife, and I think that this is what makes these matters of our part of Europe quite close to him. Now he has a wife from Slovenia, Miss Melania Trump, and I also think that he talks a lot with his wife and is fully aware. He feels our part of Europe, its problems and what is bothering us.
Jakby czuje tą naszą część Europy, jej problemy
No dobrze, a
i
jak
to, co nas
przepraszam,
nurtuje.
ale ja jeszcze o to spytam.
I'm sorry, but I'll ask about it again because there are a million questions about it also in American media. How does Donald Trump approach the German-European, German-American issues, energy issues? I ask also in the context of what the Deutsche Zeitung revealed. Donald Trump is portrayed as a pro-Russian politician, and from German documents it is clear that he, together with the Polish government of the Law and Justice Party, blocked the construction of Nord Stream 2 during his time at the office.
I rzeczywiście, tak jak mu zarzucają niektórzy, ja osobiście wcale nie
Donald Trump is a very pragmatic man, and indeed, as some accuse him, I personally do not think that this is an accusation. I think that this is his added value. He has a very business-like approach also to what he does within the office of the president. He simply looks at economic issues and looks at the interests of the United States. And he says, I have no doubts that, he told me this as we talked many times, I have no doubts that America has been swayed over the decades, above all by Germany, and in many cases. He says, look, how many American cars are in Berlin, and how many German cars are in Washington or New York? Well, count, he says, you will see, and compare why there are so few American cars, the products of our automotive industry in Berlin, and there are so many German cars in America. Is the difference so horrendous? Quality, for example? Well, no, ladies and gentlemen. These are also various other reasons that play a role here, which make German cars easier and better to sell in the United States versus American cars in Germany or other European countries.
Stanach Zjednoczonych niż amerykańskie w Niemczech czy w innych krajach Europy.
Panie prezydencie, to 3 ostatnie pytania. Jedno jeszcze...
Mr. President, these are the last 3 questions. One more will be about this issue. We had a whole series of anti-American, anti-Republican statements of Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, once famous statements, famous photos of Donald Tusk in relation to Donald Trump. How and in what way does this politician relate to the Polish Prime Minister, to Donald Tusk, and his anti-American statements recently announced?
...osób wygłaszanych ostatnio.
Wie pan, trudno mi jest powiedzieć. Ja
It's
oczywiście...
hard for me to say. I don't know the exact motives of Donald Tusk. These statements amaze me because that's not how it's done. Simply, in the interests of Poland, and I have no doubts about it, we should always have the best interests and the best relations possible with the United States, which means that it is the case of Americans whom they choose for the president and whom they choose for the Congress, who sits in the House of Representatives, who sits in the Senate. From our Polish point of view, it should be basically indifferent. We should have a good relationship with every power in the United States. That is, we should have good relations with the Republicans, we should have good relations with the Democrats, and everyone who plays the most important roles in Poland should take good care of it, so that these relations are as good as possible. Therefore, why does Prime Minister Tusk allow himself to offend, attempt to humiliate American politicians and the leaders of the American political scene on the conservative and Republican side? I have to tell you, Mr. Editor, that this is incomprehensible for me, and I don't know what the motivations are. Does he want to suck up to, I don't know, the politicians in Germany or the politicians in France?
Jakie to są motywacje? Czy chce w ten sposób podlizać się, nie wiem, politykom w Niemczech, czy politykom we
Does
Francji?
he want to suck up to some European anti-American trends? Does he think that he will suck up to the Democrats if he brutally attacks and criticizes the Republicans in the United States? Maybe yes. And maybe he intends to gain some personal benefits from it. Maybe he is looking for some international position, and he hopes that they will support him.
Czy na to, że go poprą?
Head of the European Commission? But I can say with full responsibility that Poland is losing on this. I don't know, maybe the head of NATO, maybe he's getting ready for NATO. I have no idea. Mr. President, you joined the election campaign to the European Parliament. You met with Wojciech Kolarski, I understand that this is the reason of your visit here. What do you think about the campaign of, as I understand it, your candidate in these elections?
Pan redaktor sprowadził nas na ziemię.
Mr. Editor brought us back on the ground. I will finish the second presidential term in 14 months. Actually, I am already at the stage of on one hand, some kind of summary, but also a real awareness that my presidential service is nearing its end. That's how it is. We have 2 terms. There will be another president, but it will also mean that the group of people who work with me today will have to leave the office because this is the nature of this office. Ministers leave along with the president. Wojciech Kolarski has been my minister for almost 9 years, in office all the time. But before that, for 5 years, we worked together. When I was a deputy in the Polish Sejm, when I was later a deputy for the European Parliament, Wojciech was continually my closest associate. And we know each other, I can say from a young boy, because we met as scouts over 40 years ago. And I can say I know Wojtek perfectly, and I think that he is an extremely valuable person for Poland, as a politician who also gained such a huge experience, both political and domestic politics, 9 years at the presidential office, as well as in international politics. Because Wojciech Kolarski was in the White House, he accompanied me. Because Wojciech Kolarski was in many international institutions, he accompanied me. Because Wojciech Kolarski, for him, together with me, meetings with presidents are everyday life, as well as conducting Polish affairs at the highest possible level. And I know that he will be able to do it perfectly. And today, in the European Parliament, above all, it is necessary to lead Polish interests. There is nothing more important for us. That is why I am ready to give away, so to speak, my minister, give Wojciech away to the European Parliament a few months before I finish my mission. Because if he is elected, if the Poles trust him and give him this Euro-parliamentary mandate, then he will work there for 5 years, taking care of Poland's interests. And I am convinced that for the 5 years, not for a dozen months, for 5 years, with all his might, as long as he has the strength, he will use his knowledge and skills to pursue Polish interests. And that's what I care about the most.
Ten mandat europarlamentarny, to przez 5 lat będzie tam pracował dla Polski. I jestem przekonany, że przez 5 lat, nie przez kilkanaście miesięcy, przez 5 lat będzie z całą mocą, ile tylko ma sił i wiedzy i umiejętności realizował polskie interesy. A na tym zależy mi najbardziej.
Panie prezydencie, i ostatnie pytanie. Dziś rano dowiedzieliśmy się
Mr. President, and the last question. This morning we learned about the tragic and sad news. Janusz Rewinski, a great Pole, a great artist, a man with an extraordinary heart, a man with an incredibly penetrating mind, has passed. He is not with us today. He spent the last years of his life away from the cameras. He did not want to speak too often. But one of his last stages of loud participation in public life was the support for you in the first presidential campaign.
w pierwszej kampanii prezydenckiej.
Panie redaktorze,
Mr. Editor, I really appreciated and appreciate such people as Mr. Rewinski, who thanks to their creativity never leave and never disappear. There will be no more of these creations, but those that were, fortunately, have probably been registered in the vast majority and can still be watched. The great value of such people, such artists, such creators as Mr. Rewinski is that not only did they have fun, not only did they make us laugh, not only did they improve our mood, but they also taught us. They taught life, they taught attitude, they taught us what was important, sometimes morality, but they taught. And this is a great merit, with all certainty, of this artist for the Republic of Poland, an amazing figure.
czasem moralności, ale uczyli. I to jest wielka zasługa z całą pewnością tego artysty dla Rzeczypospolitej. Duża postać.
Mr. President, thank you kindly for this meeting. The President of the Republic of Poland, Andrzej Duda, on Telewizja Republika. Thank you kindly for this meeting. Thank you very much.